Hi everyone, this is William from the Headphone Experience, and I'm here tonight with my full review of the Spirit Torino Twin Pulse Ragnarr 1706 Special Edition. I'll give you a quick look at them here. This headphone is made in Italy, and they are sold through Headamp in the United States, and the current price of these is $3,950, which makes these the most expensive headphones that I've ever reviewed so far. This is a wired, full-size, over-the-ear, open-back design. They use twin stacked dynamic drivers. There's two drivers in each ear cup that are stacked one on top of each other, and they're wired in series, which gives these an impedance of 64 ohms. The sensitivity isn't listed by Spirit Torino, but these are relatively easy to drive. They're a little bit tougher than, say, your typical 32 ohm dynamic driver headphone, but not a lot harder. Just slightly a little bit. I don't know if these would be suitable for portable use, but it is an open back headphone. They are large, they're heavy, and they're expensive, so probably not a lot of people would be buying this to use as a portable. So anyway, the weight, from what I could find on Spirit Torino's website, they've got the weight of the, I couldn't find this particular model. They had the weight of the Twin Pulse listed at 460, that would be in grams, and the weight of the Ragnarr listed at 460, but they didn't have a Twin Pulse Ragnarr Special Edition. So anyway, I'm coming up on my scale with a weight of 595 grams, which is quite a bit heavier. And to tell you the truth, this is a large headphone, and it's a pretty heavy headphone. The cable on these is non-removable. You can get a look at it here, no plugs, it doesn't detach or anything, and my understanding that the reason for that is because it's something to do with the twin driver design that made it required, I guess, to use a permanently attached cable. I'm not sure of the reason or the understanding behind that, but anyway, that's what I read somewhere, that they did go with a permanently attached cable because of that. As you can see, the cable is very substantial, very heavy on these. And this one did come with a 4-pin XLR connection at the amp end, which I did request, but it's also available with your standard 6.3 millimeter or 1/4 inch single-ended connection. Well, I guess I did want to show you the headphone in more detail. And as you can see here, it does have look quite similar to Grotto headphones, kind of the same headband and yoke design and all that. You've got all aluminum ear cups on these, and you've got a steel shaft going into an aluminum block. And the yokes themselves are also aluminum, and they do, swivel in that direction, and they do go all the way around. The headband itself is leather on the inside, and it's sort of a suede material on the outside. And then the ear pads they're pretty thick, they're soft, they're covered with a material, I believe it's called Alcantara, and I think I read somewhere a while back that comes from Japan, so I'm not sure, but anyway, and then around the back of the ear cups, this is leather also. Like I said, they swivel all the way around. They are large headphones. You can see on my head here, it covers a pretty big area. They are a little bit on the heavy side. They're pretty comfortable to me, though. They are heavy headphones, there's no doubt about it. If you've watched my videos, I've mentioned many times that heavy headphones really don't bother me. What bothers me more is excessive clamping force, and these, the clamping force feels about right. They're not squeezing too hard. They don't feel like they're going to fall off, and the weight's pretty well distributed. And really, I mean, for a large, heavy headphone, they're not uncomfortable. They're, they're not bad at all as far as comfort. So anyway, I did want to get into my review of the sound of these a little bit. First, I wanted to talk a little bit about the equipment I used and reviewing these. First of all, I used CDs as my music source, and I used a Cambridge Audio 540C CD player as a transport port only, running a digital signal to a Benchmark Media DAC1, and then an analog signal from there to 2 amps, the 2 amps I used. And because this came with a 4-pin XLR connection, the only amps I could use were my Audio GD Master 9, which has a balanced output, and I've also currently have the head amp GSX Mini on loan, and that also has a balanced output. So those are the 2 amps that I ran when reviewing this headphone. I did also throw a shit low-key 4-band equalizer into the mix because I do want to talk about that pretty extensively, because this headphone, I did try using the EQ with it, and I do like it better with a little bit of just mild EQ, nothing too serious. But I did get it where I really like this headphone, and I wanted to talk about that. I did also want to mention the headphones that I use in comparison. And because of the price of this headphone at $3,950, I thought the most suitable headphone to compare would be the Kennerton Thror, which sells at about $3,450, still $500 less, but that's the closest thing I had on hand to compare price-wise. And then after EQing this headphone a little bit and changing the tone, I realized that the tone became very similar to the Kennerton Valley, and that would be the older version, the original Valley, and it's also one of my favorite headphones. And so I did do some comparison to that too after I EQ'd it. So getting in, and then I want to talk about music a little bit. The music I used was what I typically use, a mixture of classic rock, some pop, some electronic music, quite a bit of acoustical music with especially female vocals, and then a little bit of orchestral music. And I did want to mention that this headphone is one of 3 that Spirit Torino headphones that I did receive for review. Also the Super Allegra and the Radiante. And of the 3, all 3 I would consider definitely on the bassy side of neutral, and definitely on the warm side of neutral. And of the 3 though, this would be the least bassy of the 3. The Radiante closed back being the most bassy, and then this one being the least bassy. But to be honest, it's still a little bit bassy for my taste, and I prefer a headphone that's pretty much neutral, but a little bit of bass emphasis is okay with me. Maybe 3 decibels, maybe even 5, depending on the type of music I'm listening to. But these are quite a bit on the bassy side of neutral, and so I'm going to talk about this from kind of 2 different directions. What I think of it, just right off the shelf, without any EQ, and then what I think about it with a little bit of EQing. And like I said, I didn't get too drastic, just some mild, almost moderate EQing, but nothing real extreme. And like I said, I was able to get this headphone where I enjoyed it an extreme amount, and really, it became one of the best headphones I've ever heard. So I get into that a little bit. Like I said, starting with the tone balance, I would consider this headphone, you know, the way it comes before I EQ it, I would consider it definitely on the bassy side of neutral, maybe, oh, I'd say maybe about 8 decibels of emphasis in the bass, and most of that in the mid bass. And then a very warm mid-range, kind of laid back, and then the treble sits slightly up from the mid-range, so it's got a slight V shape, but just a little bit of bump in the treble. The frequency extension, I would say, is good at the bottom end. They definitely go low, and like I said, you know, plenty of bass. But I mean, it does get pretty, you know, deep into the sub bass. And on the top end, I would say it's average. Because of a little bit of bump in the treble compared to the mid-range, I wouldn't call it a dark headphone. There is a little bit of sparkle and a little bit of brightness at the top. Like I said, I wanted to talk about EQing this because, like I said, my preference, and I'm not saying this is a bad headphone at all, because there are a lot of people out there that like bassy headphones. I mean, there's a lot of people that are bass heads and they want the bass, and to, you know, a lot of people, this headphone is probably perfect the way it comes. I personally like, you know, a little more neutral, a little brighter on the top end, so I did try the EQ, and what I did is I ran the shit low key 4-band equalizer, and I gave these headphones about 3 decibels of cut in the bass at 20 hertz. I actually bumped it back where the knob would be at about 10 o'clock, where 12 o'clock would be neutral, and I bumped it back to about 10 o'clock, which would be about a 3 decibel cut in the bass. And then about a 1 decibel boost at 400 hertz, about a decibel and a half of boost at 2000 hertz, and about a 2 decibel boost at 8000 hertz. And so, like I said, I'm going to give you my thoughts on it both ways. Starting with sub bass, very good, powerful sub bass. When I EQ'd the bass down about 3 decibels, they lost a little bit of punch in the sub bass, but it was still there. They still go low. The bass is on these, even though it's emphasized, it doesn't sound distorted, it doesn't sound muddy, it doesn't sound loose. It's you know, surprisingly tight and solid and very good bass, just a little bit too much of it for my personal taste. Although, you know, I have you know, listened to some classic rock and things like that where it did sound really good. You know, I was listening to some Rush with this, and, you know, it really, you know, put some emphasis in the drums and, you know, the bass drums and the bass guitar and all that, and really made it sound good. But just for general listening, I did prefer the headphone EQ'd a little bit. Like I said, a little bit of cut in the bass, a little bit of bump in the mid-range and treble. Getting into the mid-bass, even after I cut the bass by 3 decibels, they still have a very strong mid-bass. You know, still on the bassy side of neutral. And then, once again, very tight, well-controlled, very solid. The mids, before I EQ'd it, the mids sound sort of distant and sort of lack detail, in my opinion. Once I boosted the mids, and not a lot, like I said, maybe about 1.5 decibels, the mids really came to life and really brought a lot of detail out in this headphone. And I was surprised and, you know, very pleased. I really liked it that way. Like I said, this headphone with a little bit of minor EQing became one of my favorite headphones, one of the best I've ever heard. Excuse me a second. I think I mentioned this in the last video that I heat with wood, and it's very dry in my house, so you have to excuse me if I need a drink once in a while. Getting into the treble, the way these come off the shelf, it has a slight boost in the treble. It sits slightly up from the mids, and there's a little bit of sparkle, and you know, pretty good detail on the treble. I did boost the treble about 2 decibels and really brought the treble out, and really gave it a lot of detail, and you know, made it where I didn't have to strain it to hear it at all. And you know, I actually, you know, prefer headphones a little bit on the bright side, just slightly on the bright side. So you know, the rest of you might not want to boost the treble at all, or maybe not by 2 decibels, maybe 1 decibel. But anyway, that's where I liked it. But the treble became very clear, very clean, and very detailed. Getting into detail and resolution, like I was saying, off the shelf, the headphone, the mid-range is set back a little bit, and the detail's there, but I'm just not hearing it because, like I said, they have kind of a V shape, and the mid-range is depressed a little bit. And even though the detail's there, I'm straining to hear some of it. When I boosted the mid-range by about 1.5 decibels, which isn't that much, and cut the bass, because the bass was a little overwhelming to me, and I think I was losing part of the mid-range detail because of the bass, you know, just like I said, being a little overwhelming. It just caught my attention to the point I wasn't paying attention to the mid-range. So anyway, after EQing, the mid-range became beautiful on these. It's warm, it's smooth, it's rich, but yet very detailed. I mean, not the absolute last word in detail, not analytical, but, you know, up there, you know, real close. I mean, you know, not quite on the level of like the Kennerton's Roar in detail, but that's an almost analytical headphone. Just slightly behind that, just, you know, a little bit of loss in detail compared to that, but up there, you know, I mean, every bit as good as like the Meza Empyrean, or, you know, up there pretty close to the Kennerton Odin, pretty close to the Erzatish Phobos, not quite at the level of detail as the Hi-Fi Manoria, but that's, once again, you know, borderline analytical headphone. As far as imaging, these actually have really good imaging, very precise, very easy to locate each instrument, and very good separation between the instruments and the vocals and all that. I mean, nothing seems to smear together at all. I'm very impressed by the imaging. The Soundstage is quite large, actually. They have a very wide soundstage, among the widest I've heard, probably equal to the Kennerton Roar and Kennerton Odin. Maybe not quite as wide as the Hi-Fi Manoria, but that's got one of the widest sound stages. And this headphone has decent depth to the soundstage too. Not the deepest ever, but it's got decent depth. The mid-range, even with the EQ, is still just slightly back a little bit, and it does give them a little bit of depth to the soundstage. But width-wise, they're one of the widest I've heard. Real good width. I mean, I'm hearing sounds that sound like they're coming from 6 inches from my head. Pretty decent height to the soundstage too. As far as dynamics, before I EQ'd these, the bass was very dynamic, very hard and punchy. When I EQ'd the bass down a little bit, the bass, it's still, you know, above what I would call neutral, and it's got pretty good punch to it, but not as much as it did before. Compared to like the Kennerton Roar, the bass has more punch and more dynamic than the Roar, but compared to the Kennerton Valley, and I love the Valley in my opinion has just about perfect bass. The bass is very similar, but it's not quite as punchy, doesn't have quite the hit that the Valley does. As far as fatigue, and what I mean by that is, you know, do these headphones wear you out listening to them? And I would say they're very good in that respect. Just a very kind of warm, laid back, not overly dynamic to the point that it wears you out. Just, Nothing harsh, nothing, I don't hear any sibilance out of these headphones, so the fatigue factor is very low in my opinion. You know, a headphone that you can wear for hours without it wearing out your ears. The weight might get to you a little bit. Like I said, they're a little bit heavy, not extremely, but you know, I know people that think that 350 gram headphones are too heavy, and this one's what, 595, so depends on the person, you know. If you don't mind a heavy headphone, they're not uncomfortable, and you know, like I said, there are heavier headphones out there, so it's you know, it's up there though. So you know, before you rush out and buy one of these, you might want to figure out, you know, if you know, it is a large heavy headphone. It might get you if you want to listen to it for long periods of time. As far as forgiveness, and what I mean by that is, you know, is it forgiving of less than perfect recordings? And I would say very well so. You know, you know, it's not analytical at all, so it's not going to pull out every little flaw or every little imperfection in a recording. And to me, it works with just about any kind of music. And it's not one of those headphones where I'm searching out, you know, my 10 best recordings. I can listen to pretty much everything I have with this headphone. I did want to compare it a little bit to, you know, the two headphones that I used in my comparison. I mean, besides from the other two Spirit Torino headphones, which, like I said, it's the least bassy of the three, but still more bassy than neutral. And it has the best detail of the three, and I personally like it the best of the three Spirit Torino headphones. Compared to the Kennerton Thror, and like I said, that's the only similar priced headphone that I have. And the Kennerton Thror, I actually had the ECL02 ear pads on that, which make them slightly more bassy. They increase the bass about 3 decibels. And that was my one problem with the Thror, with the stock ear pads that it came up with. I thought it was a little bit lacking in bass, and the ECL02 ear pads, which now I believe come with the headphone. I think they come with 2 pairs, so you have a choice. They did bring the bass up where I would consider it neutral and, you know, real solid and real tight. Comparing the Thror to the Twin Pulse, the Twin Pulse still, even with the bass cut about 3 decibels, is still a little bit more bassy than the Thror. Has a little bit more weight in the low end. The Thror has a more forward mid-range with a little bit more detail. The Thror is the most detailed headphone I've ever heard. The Twin Pulse isn't far behind, but the Thror does have the edge in the detail. It will etch out every last bit of detail. Like I said, they're almost analytical. As far as Soundstage, they're both about the same width. They both have very wide sound stages. The Thror probably has a little more depth. It's not probably. They do have a little more depth to the Soundstage. And the Thror just has something that I haven't found on any other headphone yet. Just has an amazing 3-dimensional sound to the Soundstage. And a few other headphones have come close. The Kennerton Odin comes close, and the Erzatish Phobos comes close, but none of them have been able to beat the Thror so far, anything that I've heard, as far as that 3-dimensional layered soundstage. And this headphone has a good soundstage, but it doesn't have that 3-dimensional sound that the Thror does. It's more of a flat kind of, you know, just on one plain soundstage. I mean, there is a little bit of depth, but not the, you know, the drastic separate layering like the Thror has. But, you know, comparing the two, the Thror has become my headphone of choice for acoustical music and classical, but it's not really my choice for rock music and like electronic, because it just doesn't have that punch in the bass that I enjoy with that kind of music. Where, you know, this the Twin Pulse actually, in my opinion, you know, is more fun as far as listening to rock or electronic. This is more of a fun headphone, where the Ragnarr is more of a neutral, more analytical headphone. I did want to compare this to the Kennerton Valley a little bit, and I realize it's not really a fair comparison because the Valley is about a fourth the price at just under $1,000. But when I did EQ this to where I was really enjoying it, I happened to try on the Valley and noticed that the sound was very similar, and it comes up with an almost identical tone balance to the Valley, with the adjustments I mentioned earlier. And like I said, I love the Valley, and the Valley is my first choice go-to headphone whenever I'm listening to rock or electronic. So, but the Valley doesn't have, it doesn't have a huge soundstage or that three-dimensional layering that I like from the Ragnarr. So anyway, this headphone kind of falls in between the two. It's got, detail up there with either of them, and it's got the weight to the bass like the Valley does, but has a, it has a wider soundstage, probably a little more depth to the soundstage, and better imaging than the Valley. And that's saying a lot, because I love the Valley. The Valley is one of my favorite headphones, and the only place the Valley, I would say, really beats this headphone would be the Valley is a little bit more dynamic. It has a little more hit in the mid bass all the way through the mid range. It just has real strong hit, even up in snare drums and piano notes. The Valley is extremely dynamic, and once again, I'm talking about the original Valley, not the 2019 version. So anyway, so listening to rock and electronic, both of these work really well, but the Valley still has a little bit more punch, but this Twin Pulse definitely has a wider soundstage, a little more depth to the soundstage, and more precise imaging, and a little bit better separation between the instruments than the Valley does. And just to be fair, the Valley is a fourth the price of this, so I'd expect this headphone to be better in ways. So basically what it comes down to, my opinion of this headphone, is if it is not EQ'd right out of the box, I find it, it's very bassy, it's warm, and that may be perfect for a lot of people. Like I said, I'm not in any way saying this is a bad headphone, because that tone balance could be perfect for a lot. If you want a more towards neutral headphone, with little more detail and all that, this headphone is capable. It responds very well to EQ, and like I said, I didn't have to make any cuts or boost of more than 3 decibels. It doesn't take much. And to be honest, I really, really like this headphone. As an overall, I can listen to just about any kind of music with it, everything from rock, electronic to classical. It all sounds good, but like I said, to meet with my personal taste, it needs a little bit of EQing. Can I recommend this headphone? I guess that depends on what you want. If you say no to EQ, you're not going to EQ the headphone, I would say if you want a headphone with a lot of bass, very tight, well-controlled bass, and a warmer sound signature, and you're not fanatical about detail, this could be the perfect headphone for you. If you want those things, then you're going to have to make a choice. Either find a different headphone. If you want, an analytical headphone that's, neutral, then either find another headphone or give this thing a little bit of EQ. It doesn't take much. With a little bit of EQ, the detail is up there on a very high level. They have a great soundstage. They have great imaging. The bass is still there, and it's still a little on the bassy side of neutral, and just a very fun headphone. But you know, what I would consider an audiophile headphone. It's, you know, pretty close to neutral at that point. And like I said, you can listen to just about any kind of music. It's all going to sound good. This is a very good all-in-one headphone. Like I said, the Ragnarr I like more for acoustical and classical orchestral music, that type of thing. The Valley I like more for rock and you know, electronic. Another headphone that is a very good all-around headphone would be the Hi-Fi Manaria, and another that I can think of would be the Urzatish Phobos or the Urzatish Mania. Those are all very good all around. So in my opinion, this is a very good all around. You can listen to just about any kind of music, you know, and it's going to be up to you if you want to EQ it a little bit or not. But like I said, it doesn't take much EQ and it responds very well to EQ. So yeah, you know, this could be an ideal headphone under the right circumstances. So it's kind of a, you know, what if recommendation. If you're the right person, this could be the perfect headphone. If you're, you know, if you're dead set on not using EQ and you know, want more neutrality and, you know, a little more detail, then maybe it's not the headphone for you. But anyway, well, I'm going to wrap this up now. And once again, this is William from the Headphone Experience. If this video has helped you, please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, and you are all welcome to join us at the Headphone Experience on Facebook. Thank you.